All right, family. I want to welcome you tonight. This is another night of the Comedic New Year, and we got the ancestor up on the screen. I think both of these brothers that's going to be showing our ancestors, and they're going to be supporting our young person that's going to be presenting. Her name is Jillian Deas. So, family, if you would, I want you to give your ear, and I want you to listen to what the sister has to share.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jillian Deas. Like he mentioned, just a quick introduction. I'm currently a master's student at the Ohio State University in educational policy. I'm a Columbus native. I went product of Columbus City Schools, and my undergraduate degree is in middle childhood education with a license to teach. Um, in addition to those things, I often work and advocate for parenting students who are going back to school or in school trying to graduate while also serving as a parent, um, as well as for Black and Brown bodies at large. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen. It seemed like I might have been. Okay. It seems like you might be able to see this screen here.
You can share your screen. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. So now, but make sure you click when you share screen because at the bottom there should be some things down there, and there's a share screen thing that should be down there. Is it down there?
It just says it's sharing a window and it says stop sharing.
All right,
That's all it
cool.
tells me.
Now make sure that if there's a button that says audio, make sure you
Uh-huh.
share audio because you will be talking and nobody will hear.
Would it be
All
better
right.
if I don't share the video? I
If
mean, the
I
presentation?
now I can share the video. You got a video?
No, it's not a video. It's just like a prezi. If not, it's okay. I can just talk. I
Well,
don't
no,
mind.
but let's try it first, and then
Okay.
like I said, I could call because I got your number. I call you if I don't hear your voice. But go
Oh,
and try to share the screen.
so I'm clicking share screen. I'm going to that screen button. And are you seeing it now?
Oh, is that you that say it like hold on hold on, I'm putting it up right now. Is that you?
This black thing?
No, that's Kwame.
Okay. It's all right if it ain't working.
No, it say one perspective,
Yep,
Columbus.
that's me. That's me. That's me.
That's you. All right,
Yeah.
cool. So now
And you
I'm
can still
going.
see me.
Now, did you click the audio piece?
No, so you can't hear me right now.
Well, no, I'm going. They can see the screen. I'm gonna get off the screen. I'm gonna let you stay on there, and you could describe what's because they can see the screen. It's small though. Now,
Um,
what is that cool?
I think that might distract, so I will just talk and it's fine.
No, go ahead. They might be able to see it because they can see me. So I'm gonna go.
Okay. Well, let's go for it and see what happens. So, like I've already mentioned, I don't want to keep eating to my time because I think I have quite a bit of content. So, I was invited to this space just to speak on my experience with the Columbus protests and to offer some insight I have in respect to the COVID-19 pandemic, um, the health crisis on racism that the city of Columbus has deemed an issue, which has been an ongoing issue for as long as we all know. Um, and I was invited by my uncle Kwame, so I'm very enlightened to be here. So I am a big teacher, so I like to go through agendas. So quickly, we're going to talk about the Columbus protest. I'll try to give as much background knowledge as possible without getting into things that you probably already have listened to, heard about, or know about. Um, and then after that, I want to streamline into just a quick informational about the state of Black education from my perspective, as it relates to post-secondary and or primary and secondary education, so K-12 spaces, as well as post-secondary education. I'll try to talk a little slower for that. So, um, firstly, I want to talk about the Columbus protest, as to easily term it. This might also be known as the Black Lives Matter movement that occurred in Columbus, Ohio. Um, this might have been just simply a protest that someone might say is in response to the very public and very socially viewable killings of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and the public knowledge of the killing of Breonna Taylor by either white racist in the case of Ahmaud Arbery, and the police in the case of George Floyd as well as Breonna Taylor. Those seem to be the catalyst of these protests. There has been what we might call bad blood brewing among the police and the Black and brown communities for as long as slavery ever existed and on beyond then. So these are not new events. These are not new things to have protests. But what's important to consider that might have been new is the rhetoric that we saw around these protests on social media, on news outlets, and in academia through the documentation of it. So on social media, there was a big presence of these protests on Facebook, on Instagrams, on your TikToks, on your Snapchats, all the social media platforms that folks use nowadays. We saw videos from the protest, and oftentimes our news outlets, our common TV channels, were also in the mix of these protests and live streaming. So live streaming is still a new technology. Most people have just started to really learn how to use it in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, it's still new technology, but it proved to be pretty monumental in this space because it allowed those who weren't actually on the ground at the protest to feel like they were there and to offer comment and opinions on them. Now, the problem around the rhetoric on social media is that you often saw racist rhetoric come out and thrive on these live feeds. And a lot of it was very gross and disgusting language that was used around Black and brown bodies, but also around bodies of just Americans who believed that they were exercising their right to go against oppression in any form. So that rhetoric became a little more elusive when it came to the news outlets, and even more so in documentation, because historically news outlets have portrayed Black and brown people as savages, as thugs, as recipients of welfare, as all these negative connotations, and that has been the single story that has been portrayed for centuries. And these protests were not spared of that news tactic. When looting or riot or fires or property destruction was taking place, the social media or the news outlets made sure to capture moments when it might have been a Black or brown body committing these acts, even though most of these acts were committed by a non-Black person, often with the hope to distract from the movement. Some folks have believed it might have been a tactic to incite a race war. There's a lot of theories as to why these things were happening, but there were many of them that were called infiltrators. So they were not the protesters who were there in support of the protection that Black lives should matter and do matter, and should be protected the way that everyone else is. They were just outside of the goal. So how that feeds into documentation in academia is difficult to discuss without having a ton of articles sitting here in front of us. However, a lot of documentation in academia, even when it goes back to the Los Angeles riots and other things like that, they call them riots. And this is an interesting term because these actually weren't cases of, definable riots. Most of these were uprisings. These were rebellions against some type of oppression. And to term them a riot or protest is to minimize what the actual intended purpose is and the reason why they started. And that becomes problematic because the way history books are written is based off of academia. And when our academics start to term these spaces that way. This is the single story continues. That narrative that Black and brown people are these negative stereotypes continues and is perpetuated in future generations. So it's interesting to consider it. Something else that I want to move on to talk about is the impact of these multicultural and ethnic allies, which in these protests, probably about 70% of them were comprised of non-Black parties, non-Black bodies, non-Black persons. And that's important to consider when, like I just said, the social media and news outlets were capturing the Black people in these spaces, but weren't capturing the fact that it actually wasn't a lot of Black people. It was what some might call allies, which this ally might be someone who is non-Black, but is a supporter of Black lives and a supporter of equal policies and equal justice and equal opportunity. So they're an important piece to all this, because what started to happen and what kind of leads into this division idea is that some of the other allies began to push their own honesty and their truth and what they believed should take place. If you are not in a Black and brown body, or you have not had a Black and brown experience, you might not be able to speak to what is best for Black people, for Black communities, for Black kids, for anything to that matter. And that is what leads to this division idea. So this division happened partially because some of the protests started to dissipate to smaller areas. So while the Columbus protest was large and everybody was going downtown, by the dozens for quite a few weeks, they began to pop up and have little ones in smaller areas like Worthington's, Gahanna's, Groveport's, Upper Arlington's. All these smaller little protests began to pop up, which pulled your people, your bodies, your numbers from downtown, which has led to, honestly, the dissipation of these protests in Columbus, for that least. And part of this is happening because of the diversion among Black organizations, the diversion between their end goals and the actionable outcomes that they're looking for. So a lot of folks went out in these protests and didn't know what their purpose was, or had a specific purpose that maybe didn't align with everybody else's. So if their purpose was to encourage the charging of the police officers of these murders, that was a very short and actionable goal that they saw, and that's what they were there for. If someone's goal was to go out and combat the entire police system, that was a different goal. If their goal was to go out and to combat the whole criminal justice system, that was a different goal. And some people's goal was to go out and be social, because this is happening during the COVID-19 pandemic, when in our city, a lot of things have been shut down for months at that point, and people simply wanted to be around other people. So it led to just this diversion of who wants what. Are we looking for reparations? Are we looking for an end to, the abolition of prisons? Are we looking for the abolishment of the police force as it is? Are we looking to improve it? It led to a lot of different ideas on what should happen and what should take place, thus leading to the conversation just stopping, because no one wanted to decide who was right and who was wrong, which leads into this credentialing idea. So what we also saw during these protests, online and in person, is that there was a clear discrepancy on who the experts were and what was needed to be considered an expert, and how that impacted their involvement in the Facebook groups, and their involvement in grassroots organizations, or if those two were really disjointed. And I don't wish to be funny, but I did begin to myself term this as an idea of white peopling. Hey, Jalil. I termed this as a thing called white peopling, because there was an instance of a young man who happened to be about 21 years old, native to Columbus, who was seemingly picked apart by these seemingly white allies online, because he was trying to lead an organization in the protest and begin establishing consistent people being downtown and try to identify actual outcomes they were all looking forward to. But when they started to look into his history, they tried to discredit him at every point. When he stopped sharing information online and only wanted to talk in private, they used that as a tool to say that he's trying to be secretive and not have transparency. But this is because the allies aren't fully aware of Black uprisings, where most Black uprisings are planned in secrecy. That's the only way to protect the movement. So this is where some of those white allies came in to be a difficult place, as well as this credentialing idea. So the last thing I want to talk about in terms of this protest, because I want to move for my other stuff, is just the philosophical idea of it. If we step back and look at it just from a philosophical point of view, there's quite an interesting space to look at in deciding about what we use to identify who and how things are identified, and if we apply identifications or if they should be chosen. And this gets into a conversation which has a ton of scholarly work on about what race is, how do we define it, can we look at somebody and physically see that they are a certain race? Is it a certain marker or a certain life experience they should have to be considered a certain race? And it becomes really interesting when we consider how the main races that we talk about are Black and white. If we talk about anyone who's not Black or white, we talk about them maybe being Asian or Latino or Latina or Hispanic. And those have to do with ethnicity and nationality or culture and not the skin color. So when we talk about those things, it's important to look about how those are different. And it becomes even more interesting when we talk about the criteria that's needed to meet racial identities. I often use the term physically presenting because we like to use what we see on somebody to identify them, and sometimes that's not the truth that they withhold in themselves. Or we see that a lot of us may critique different Black presenting folks, like maybe Ben Carson. We might question his authenticity because of his actions, and maybe that has to do with his culture or things like that, but he presents a certain way, so we might still identify him as Black. It just calls those things into question, which I think are always interesting to consider. So I want to move forward into this space of education, and specifically first talking about K through 12 or age 0 to about age 20 or 21 sometimes when people stay in school a little longer. I think it's important to talk about this space, not because I only focus on education, but because how impacted it's going to be in our day and age. Many people are still going to work and are okay at work. Many people are still going about their lives and not experiencing anything too different outside of maybe callous remarks at a grocery store or, some systemic racism issues still. But it's just not as direct impact as what our kids might experience in schools. And right now there's a racially tense space, and this is going into our schools and into our education spaces when it comes to policies, mental health issues, and discipline. So what might happen in response to the racially tense society we live in right now is some districts, some school boards, some school buildings may decide to implement policies around hate speech and around politics to try to keep those things out of their school buildings with the end goal of safety. And that can become an issue when we know that our young Black and brown students typically have some type of racial fatigue or racial trauma. So when they talk about racism or slavery or anything that they find to be angering, they might not present in the nicest way in their eyes, in their perspective. And if they, cross a certain line when they're discussing these things, it might be considered hate speech, which might then pipeline our students into discipline policies and discipline issues more than what already exists, which is already a huge disparity where the numbers are outrageous. When I say outrageous, I mean millions of hours worth of school learning is lost by students when they are suspended or expelled because of policies around discipline. This will not be any different, and I think it's going to be important for us to pay attention to those things, especially with mental health when our students have been out of school for so long. Black and brown students are typically not allowed to have the typical kid experience because they're overaged, um, and they just are seen as threats and all these other stereotypical things that have been painted about them. They typically have mental health issues that go unaddressed and unresolved because they are seen negatively compared to their peers who often are white or other, and are not allowed to be kids in these spaces. So this will be a big impact on what we see in the future. This will also impact the virtual learning space that our kids go into, where there's a certain level of anonymous nature of virtual education, or a safer space for people to say things that they might not say in person. Our kids might be more susceptible to that as they engage in these virtual learning spaces. Because I have yet to see many schools roll out any discipline policies or protection policies in the virtual learning space. Furthermore, in virtual learning, our kids of color may experience bigger dips in their education due to lack of technological access, lack of internet access, lack of maybe parent support. It's not new to any of us that a lot of our families exist with single parent households or have the parents that are separate, living in separate households. And anytime there's one adult in the household, mainly that adult has to work. So if our students are in houses where the adults are working and no one can pay attention to them in terms of school, they might not get the support they need to engage in virtual learning. They might not get the forced nature of virtual learning if the parents aren't prioritizing it. If they have siblings, the older kids will likely be, forced to have to help the younger kids just by virtue of being the older person in the space, therefore taking away from their virtual education. This might be a big impact to our kids, even moving forward if the public schools can't handle it, the current governmental administration is looking for opportunities for school choice, which is all private ran schooling options. If they take this opportunity and capitalize on it and defund public schools and push funding into school choice, our students will see the biggest impact of this. Virtual learning might leave them almost 16 months behind in school, if they may not return until the next school year. And then there will be obviously a lot of time to try to make up, plus moving forward. If the public school are defunded, our kids will not be protected in those spaces because school choice is about who knows and who knows what. And oftentimes the middle and upper class folks know a little bit more about what a quality education looks like, what it should be, and have opportunities to actually take their kids to these places, maybe afford it, and provide the transportation every day, because many of these schools will not provide busing. Our lower class students will face the brunt of this, and a lot of lower class students happen to be Black students, which becomes a big issue in Black education. When they're already ostracized from gifted education opportunities, they're already over-identified in special education opportunities, and they simply aren't provided the supports that they typically need to have the same opportunities. It's not about providing more, it's just the opportunities. This will impact our post-secondary education or our college and universities as well. And without carrying over from the K-12, because I could add about 10 more minutes to my presentation with that, I want to focus on just the impacts of COVID-19 in this space. And that is...
Sister, take your time. We control the airwaves. So
Okay.
this is the bomb. Take your
All right.
time.
Okay. I still want to be respectful. I got you. So when I focus on post-secondary education, there's 4 big pieces that I think are not being paid attention to because there's a lot of distractors right now in our space, but are really impactful, especially to Black and brown bodies. Right now, what's happening due to COVID-19, due to this pandemic that resulted in a loss of income on all infrastructure levels, there is decreased funding accessibility. So there are less work study opportunities, there are less scholarships, there are less grant opportunities. And right now, they're actually currently threatening to pull Pell Grant eligibilities. Um, this is going to impact our Black and Brown students who are still a large portion going to college as first generation school students. Um, there is nothing, this is not new knowledge. We know it is hard to get our Black and Brown kids to go to college, attain that college degree, and then have a degree that they actually come out of school and make money with. And aren't sitting in, $70,000 worth of debt as they walk out as potentially 23 or 24-year-old kids. So this accessibility to funding is a big piece that our kids will not go to school if they're going to go through, get that much debt with no guarantee of a career. Additionally, this funding is not there because of the budgets. I work within the university, and they can't come at me for too much I say because I'm just a graduate student. But they proposed to all the different departments to prepare for 20% budget decreases. That's a big sizable portion of budgets, which are leading to less support for minoritized students. So when you talk about cutting a budget that much, you're talking about potentially cutting 5 to 10 faculty or staff and potentially 5 to 10 student positions in a department of about 100 people. And those aren't good numbers when a lot of the departments need those people that are there, because typically the 20% we're talking about that would be lost are those who support minoritized students. And this also applies to your diversity and inclusion initiatives. They simply might become less of a priority. When you talk about numbers, which is all college spaces talk about in policy, they want to know the number of students that will be facing the impact of these things. Currently, I think at Ohio State University, the number is about 5% of the student body are Black and Brown students. 5%. So when you talk to them about numbers, they might be willing to cut some of these diversity inclusion initiatives that are meant to positively impact 5% of their student body. And they might choose to focus on the other 95%. This becomes a big issue when you talk about students' accessibility to college, students seeing themselves in their spaces and feeling safe in these spaces, as well as your staff and faculty. It's already a big disparity of having Black faculty in these spaces, especially if you add the extra identity of Black and women, or Black and trans, or Black and everything else. You find an issue of seeing such representation. And when these diversity and inclusion initiatives aren't the biggest priority, we have an issue where they're not going to try to increase those numbers of students, and they won't care because that's not the biggest number of students there. They can write that off by saying we're providing equitable opportunities because we're here. In a school like OSU, which is a land grant, it's a public land grant space, situated in what used to be a predominantly Black lived area, it's very impactful when you don't see the number of people there at that school in the equal percentages. And when, as a student, I know I stayed at Ohio State not because I had a great undergraduate experience, but because the college I was going into had a large percentage of Black faculty and staff. The representation was clear, and it was clear that they supported initiatives around Black and Brown bodies and Black and Brown students. That's what attracts your student bodies to come in. You stop attracting those, you stop having them go into academia, and you stop having them go into the professional fields. Less matriculation there means less Black and Brown doctors, less Black and Brown teachers, less Black and Brown professionals in general, and less Black and Brown wealth. So the last piece that I always like to touch on, because it's not always talked about in higher education, is how parenting students might be impacted by some of these changes due to the COVID-19 stuff that I just talked about with the earlier kids, the primary and secondary kids. Um, if they're not going back to physical school, I'm sure it would be really hard for us to imagine what it's like as a parent to wear your parent hat, your teacher hat, as well as maybe an employee hat, all at the same time in the same 24 hours, every single day. And what that might look like to be successful in that space. So being a good parent, making sure your students getting their education that they need as well, getting the support they need, but you also having to devote time to your studies to try to get good grades as well as providing, funding and economic resources for your family. These things are going to be more impacted than ever right now. The local districts are not going back to school right now. They've already said that, and parents are scrambling. I work directly with parenting students, and I am a parenting student. And I'm currently thinking about how will I sit in my classroom from 4:30 to 6:50 in the evening when my son's daycare closes at 6. Do I bring him home early or do I leave the class early? And then that's during dinner time. Do I order out those nights? Do we eat, pre-cooked meals? What do we do to make sure I'm being the best parent that I can be? As well as working. I work during the day, so I don't exactly have time to do my studies. So then it's, you're working, you maybe go to class, you take care of your kid, and then you maybe do your homework at night when most people will probably be sleeping. And so parenting students' self-care becomes a big issue. And honestly, their retention becomes an issue because it's a sometimes not a necessary burden to go back to school if you can find a job that makes ends meet. But most parents that go back to school as a parent are trying to make a better life for their kids and create more generational wealth for their family. And that is a big sacrifice they have to make. But right now, with these COVID-19 implications, it's important to think about how they will be impacted, the number of that population that we'll be losing. Because currently, nationally, about 20% of all college students in the universities and community colleges are student parents. We could potentially lose up to 10% of that population nationwide due to this pandemic. And that means, unfortunately, those are sometimes our biggest diversity and inclusion initiative people who are going to be lost, and will lead to a pipeline of effects that will impact their kids, and their kids' accessibility to college, as well as their own accessibility to wealth, and providing a living for their kids. So with that, I think I ended everything I had. I can stop sharing my screen. There we go. Stop sharing. Okay. All right. I think I'm done. He said 30 minutes, so I think I went 30 minutes. I can't hear you.
Thank you. My mic was off. Listen, you did an excellent and a fantastic job. You know what I'm saying? Because when he was talking about a young person coming, I did not know that you was gonna come like this. You came with that power and that magic and that energy, and I want to thank you. But listen,
Yeah.
I have some questions to ask.
Yes.
So, because you brought up nationality and ethnicity versus race,
Yes.
can you go a little bit into that for me? Now, Kwame, if you're listening, I'm going to bring your camera up so that you can help me with some of these questions, because for some reason people ain't asking questions. I want to ask. So, what did you discover about the difference between nationality and ethnicity and race while you was down protesting?
So I've taken a course on this, and I literally just took this course last in the fall in the spring. I'm sorry, in the spring around race, citizenship, and education. And the scholar who I took this under is an amazing scholar named Winston Thompson, who does profound work philosophically in this space. And that opened my eyes to this idea. But when I got to the protests and things like that, it became more prevalent, because what came about on Facebook in these, in these virtual spaces, as well as down the protests, is this question of who is actually Black. Who would you call Black, and what qualifies you as being a Black person, or what makes you qualified to speak for Black people? And that becomes a big issue when you talk about, okay, are you Black because you grew up in this stereotypical Black experience, which is typically, viewed or portrayed as maybe a low income experience, which isn't true. Is your Black experience the way you speak? Is the Black experience maybe the food you cook at Thanksgiving? Is your Black experience the holidays that you actually celebrate, or the God that you, pay respects to? It became a question of who is what. And that's when I started to really want to pick apart how that impacts these organizational groups from the ground up. Because unfortunately, without a higher level of education, or if you don't read on your own, or don't push your, the things that they teach you in K-12 spaces, because it's none of this. If you don't look beyond those things, you're not going to consider what race actually is. And it's not really a thing, right? It's not a biological marker that we could say, clearly, we look at this thing and that's what it is. It's not you take a biopsy of a piece of cancer and you can tell it's a cancerous cell because of what it does, how it behaves. You can't do that with race. Race is only been constructed through mechanisms of oppression, mechanisms of economic stifling, of lack of opportunity, social construction all the way. However, there are always some arguments that might say, well, race is tied to where you're from. But if we're talking about where someone's from, that has to do with ethnicity and nationality and ancestry, not the actual presentation of your skin color. Because it's not uncommon to see someone who presents as maybe a chocolate Black person with a darker melanin, but has green eyes. And someone's brain might be very confused as to how they have this stereotypical white characteristic in their eye color, but present as Black skin, not realizing that that's what ancestry can do. So that's where that idea came from. And as it flooded into the space of these protests, because this perspective is questioned. I'm what you might call biracial, right? I have a white mom and a Black dad. And I had someone tell me, you're not even really Black. And I'm
Turn
like,
your mic down, Kwame. Go ahead.
so it was so baffling to me. And this was someone who knew my family and knew my upbringing. And I'm like, how do you get that? Because if we're talking about Black and melanin, Black and experience, Black, what are we speaking of? Ancestry? It becomes this question. And most people can't go beyond that question of what are we actually talking about.
So I wasn't the only one that was totally confused when I went down to that damn march.
No.
Because when I went to the march in Columbus, it was a lot of white people. But now this is what gets me, because what you talk of, the whole concept of race is a man-made construction, but the very things that put race in place or maintain it in place are very real things that we bump up against.
Right.
So how do we deal? I mean, how do we deal with how? I don't even know how to frame my damn question, because
I know what you're talking about. How do you get rid of it, right? How do you try to make these policies and spaces where that doesn't impact it? And I think we are far, far beyond the age where we could try to do that. I think it's at this point, it's what some people try to reference like as the colorblind theory. As you probably heard the rhetoric of saying someone saying like, no, I don't see color.
No, that's when I hear that, I know I'm dealing with a real racist, excuse my language. No, that scares me, especially when it comes out of white. When it comes out of Black people's mouths, I have a dummy. When it comes out of a white person's mouth, I watch them out the corner of my eye, because I'm waiting for the knife to come out. I'm just saying.
Well, and you know what? It also comes down to a question of who are we more fearful and concerned with? A racist or a bigot? A racist, someone just doesn't like you, right? Doesn't like a certain person because of certain things, because of this race idea. But a bigot pushes the boundaries and takes that hate towards a race and makes policy changes,
Mm.
which is, I don't want to be funny. In our upcoming election, we have two bigots who have made policy changes due to their disinterest and disenfranchisement with a certain group of people. Even if they don't do that right this moment, one of the candidates, I guess, maybe doesn't. I don't know. But his previous policies, aka the drug bill back in the 90s, that was a very bigoted policy. It impacted a specific group of people because of their biased notions about it. I'm more fearful of a bigot than a racist. You can hate me all day. Go to sleep. I don't know. I won't sleep any different, right? It's when you're affecting these policies that affect people, affect kids, affect homeless, affect all these groups of people in the public space that I get really bothered and really worried.
So now, in that class that you took about the ethnicity and nationality and race,
Mm-hmm.
were they able to come up with a definition of who's black?
No, no, and none, and there is no scholar that truly has. There is no documentation that truly makes a definition. And I would have to go find the book because my brain's been just not
Don't worry
working.
about it.
One of the books that gives you seven characteristics of how to identify somebody. One of those, it's a physical marker, a biological marker, ancestry, culture, ethnicity, and self-identification. And there's one more I can't remember. It might be physical presentation. Seven. So 7 things that you're trying to check off boxes to say that you're black, or to say that you're not, or to say that you're something else.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so when you have certain conversations with people who have the discussion about every person originating from the first people in Africa, does that mean everybody is ancestrally black? I don't know if we want to call it that. We could say that, but do they present as black supporting? Maybe not.
No, right.
Right?
No, that's when we get into the human argument.
Yes.
See, but the human argument is robbed by the fact of the mechanisms that have been put in place to maintain the idea of race.
Yeah.
Now, do you see the question that Elder Margarita asked?
Yes, I do see this question. So I
And
appreciate the question. This question of culture. Culture is a super all-encompassing thing. I think we spent like 3 classes at least talking about, because it's so definable by you, right? So for me, I think cultural practices are how you interact with people, how you interact with family, the way you culturally upbring your children, and that's typically learned from past generations of parents. What your belief and work ethic is, what your core morals and ethics are, right? That's what I think culture is to me. The food that you cook, the way you clean your house, all those things I think are cultural. Um, Traditions that you do, holidays that you follow, I think that's what culture means to me. Maybe the importance of family to somebody, or the way your family interacts with each other and who you consider family. If you consider extended friends family more so than your bloodline family, I think it's a really malleable space, which is why it's one of those 7 characteristics that can almost never really define somebody. But I think that's what it means to me.
oh man. All right, so I got another question for you.
Yeah.
Education, education and the movement.
Yes.
Now, question. What needs to be taught? Well, let me put it this way. For our children,
Hmm.
because you just kind of you messed up my whole tribe thing now, because it's like
Yeah.
now I gotta see, because you done knocked race out the box. Okay, cool, all right.
I mean,
And
but don't say that, because it still impacts
it's very, yeah, I know. So
it's
this is the
there.
question:
Yeah.
what, as as a person in college right now, as a
Yeah.
master's student in education, what type of stuff have you come to term, well, not even come to term, that you think our children need to learn to keep what's going on with the power of where we are right now going. Because we're going to have children coming out and they're going
Yes.
to remember this experience.
Yes.
So, what type of things should we start teaching some of our children, whether we're doing Coogee Chai, my fault,
Mhm.
Kuumba schools? I can't say the
Yeah.
day of the week in the regular way because your uncle want to make me do push ups and I'm old. I can't do all that. But and that's Saturday. If we
Yeah.
did Saturday schools or we did cultural schools or something like that, what type of stuff should we be teaching our children to make sure that we can make sure that this movement that is popping off right now, that is at the height of popularity, where we got politicians talking about reparations, we got
Yes.
entertainers talking about reparations, we got people in power talking about making major changes. What type of what do we need to teach our kids to keep this thing going?
So I think a part of this that we have to teach them is this idea where we start to pull back the influence of identity. So the identity conversation that we're having right now is super impactful because what has happened typically in society is we get this identity, we start to put categorizations, criterion, and identifications on things, and that's how we choose to deal with them. We have to remove that. So part of removing that is I agree with that comment that was made. We need more millennium schools. I maybe call them like exploration schools. But to push this movement forward and to keep these conversations alive, I think it starts with the rhetoric. And the rhetoric is that this protest that was happening, I would not call that a protest. A protest is when they are mad about having to wear a mask. A protest is when they are mad about someone raising taxes or when they're, wanting to get cheaper tea, whatever protest we want to call it. This wasn't a protest. These are uprisings or revolutions. And when you start to use that language, it's not only positivist, but it's encouraging and it teaches you that you're doing the right thing for the American people. Protest sounds, it gives the idea that it's someone just being upset about a decision. These people weren't upset about a decision, right? They were upset and unrested about the loss of life, the careless loss of life, and the malicious loss of life due to someone's physical presentation of color. So I think part of the education has to be around calling these uprisings and calling these revolutions, because that's when you start to make future revolutionaries who will actually go about and make changes, either for the American people or for the Black people, whichever movement you're pushing. I think that's the biggest part that's supposed to be taught. I don't necessarily know that it's going to be helpful to always watch all the film and do a huge case study on every piece of video evidence that has come out of these protests. There's a scholar named Kimberly Braswell who, amidst all this, released a paper talking about Black murder porn and how on these sites, on these social media, our kids are being exposed to constantly seeing Black trauma happening. And that's not healthy. It's one thing to be woke or to be, acknowledgeable about what's happening, but it becomes not such a good thing when it's destroying your mental health and your mental ability to actually make change. And so I think moving forward, it's more about teaching kids about what people have done in the past, doing different case studies on your Marcus Garveys of the world, your Black Panthers, righteous leaders outside of Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, because that's all they're taught in schools. I think that's how you start to keep this narrative alive while putting it back into place. I don't know if you guys use the term Sankofa. That idea of taking it back, going to the back, pulling it forward, and then
Girl, with your uncle, what? What? You see, you say? I rode with your uncle, Sankofa. But listen, I don't even see, because we in our schools we have been teaching the watered down version of
watered down is a really
everything.
nice way to say
I mean, because when you really look at Martin Luther King's life, and a lot of people out there that might be listening don't even know.
Right.
Y'all stopped at like 1963 with Martin Luther King. Yeah, I mean, it's like when you really get into the study of him and some of these movements. So you saying increase the study of movements, change the language from protest to actually teaching revolutionary ideas.
Mm-hmm.
All right, question. Now check this out. When you was down there, because you're an educated person,
Mm-hmm.
because I went down there once. I got suspicious when every time I turned around, a white girl was giving me a bottle of water, or or, or I mean, really, I didn't see
No, yeah.
when I went to the protest. It was so organized. It kind of threw me off.
Yep. You
You
have
know what I'm saying?
medication, you have this, you have this.
They
Yep.
had milk ready for when you got it. I mean, it. You know what I'm saying? When I protested or when I did what I did, you know what I'm saying? Shit went down. You had to get what you had to get the
Yeah.
best way you could. It wasn't provided for you. So I
No.
went down there and I was very uncomfortable. So I put my back up against the wall. I
Yeah.
had my video camera going. I didn't feel comfortable. But I'm saying all that to say or to ask the question and bring it back around. How when you were down there, I mean, because you very wise, very intelligent. Let me ask a question.
Yeah.
Did you ask any of the people that were supporting Black Lives Matter this question? And this is the question because you mentioned it in your talk. How many people were down there were really down there for Black Lives Matter or were down there just to protest George Floyd?
Right.
Because the question that I want to know about a lot of those people down there, are they in support of reparations?
Right.
She said, right.
I didn't ask that question. I'm an observer. So
What did you observe?
my uncles and my dad have always taught me you have two ears and a mouth, one mouth. Use your two ears more than you use your one mouth. And so when I'm in spaces like that, personally, I am very quiet and I watch. You were down there, so you needed to really watch when you were down there because you didn't know if this random white guy is about to throw this firework thing at the cops, and they're not going to beat him any color out of him, right? Um, so I had to be observant. I didn't ask that question, but I did notice that a lot of people were mainly focused on the force of the police and the George Floyd killing, which a lot of people brought issue with the fact that you were talking mainly about George Floyd and not Breonna Taylor. Ahmaud Arbery got lost in all of that because I guess he wasn't killed by an on-duty cop, but the conversation just left from that idea. I didn't ask anybody specifically, but you could tell that there was a distinct diversion from who was there to support what. But I think that comes from, and I'm not a, I don't believe I sit in any space where I can make big critiques like this. But I think the short name of Black Lives Matter is so malleable that people can use it in a way that is
Ooh.
unfunctional. Do you want me to take you down this lane?
Yeah. I mean, because for me, because the issue for me was the whole. It's like all this is falling under Black Lives Matter, and it just
Yeah.
and it's bigger than
Way
that.
bigger. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like, but to confine this and
Yeah.
to limit its growth and to limit its power, I want to place it up under the idea of Black Lives Matter, and
Yeah.
that's what I kind of felt for
Yep.
myself personally.
When you have people who can take this thing that you have seemingly built a movement off of, and they can replace that first word and it still means something, your name is too malleable. There should have been a title or a name or a quote that they were using that you could not take it apart and make it mean something else.
But there's very few words or very few things that you could do that with these spin doctors out here.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah.
we're dealing. Excuse my language. We're dealing with
Mhm.
bitchcraft and fuckery.
Yeah.
So we got sorcerers of bitchcraft and sorcery that can
Yeah.
take almost anything and shape it and make it appear. Because like my issue was a lot of people thought they was down there about George Floyd
Mm-hmm.
when it should have been bigger than that. Because long before George Floyd, I have
Mm-hmm.
an uncle that
Yeah.
I have an uncle that because of some type of relationship with a white girl
Yeah.
was drugged to his death by
Yeah.
his neck behind a car.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because then you think about this idea, and this is so side of it, but this was a lot of the people who were down there, those who also protest rape culture and things like that, but don't understand that for a black man at one point in time in this society, you could rape a white woman by looking at her in the eyes.
Right.
But
I
y'all
mean,
want to talk about canceling rape culture.
oh yeah.
Rape culture has been around since they brought Africans here out, kidnapped them and enslaved them. This is embedded culture that I think they don't get the concept of. And I think George Floyd just was something they could attach to. But I won't discredit the fact that after people sitting in the house for 2 months because of this COVID pandemic, that they weren't just going out to protest just to do something.
Now and see, so you saying that in a sense, some people was out there supporting because it was like a vacation.
It was a vacation. It was something to do.
It was something to do.
Outside your house, to get all loud, to be with your friends, maybe to make new friends, because the people there were very friendly. Which I'm just hesitant to other people in general, but they were very friendly. And like you said, the water piece and all that.
Oh my God. It was so friendly, it was scary. Listen.
It was a little scary. Now I will say some of that water, I was sad when I heard that it was being tainted, because I was one of those people who days that I couldn't go because I had my kiddo, I would take and drop water off because I could do that with him in the car.
Right.
And I was sad when they started to discover that people had gone around and, popped stuff into the bottles and things like that, because it made it more difficult. We couldn't drop off snacks. You couldn't drop off the granola bars and stuff, because
I didn't drink the water. I'm just.
And you know what? I don't think the water was actually meant to really be drinking, really, right? You should be bringing your own drinking water. I think that water was there for the continual pepper spraying. Now, what I did learn is, and this is what I did towards the end of the protest, even though they had kind of stopped most of the pepper spraying, I began taking bags, like zip seal bags that I packed prior to with gloves of like not masks, but the rags. So the rags that you might buy from Walmart in like a 30 pack. I would buy those, put those in the bags, and as soon as someone's getting pepper sprayed, you put distilled water on it, soak it real quick, and they can wipe it off better.
Right.
I found that to be a safer mechanism and a more trustworthy mechanism than someone grabbing a water bottle and throwing it on their face, because you have no clue what was in that bottle. And realistically, water really wasn't going to help with the pepper spray.
Right. They had milk down there too, and they were
bringing the whole gallons of milk, which I was like, you're better off finding half gallons and buying those. But nonetheless.
Well, listen. Now, when I saw that, I went to go get lunch. I'm just being honest with you. It's like they had whole gallons of milk ready. I'm going to get lunch.
Yep.
Because
they were ready for the rah-rah, which was
for the rah-rah, which you know what I'm saying? Which once again takes, huh?
I said it was understandable. It was expected but I thought it was expected because some of the people who were there were truly throwing frozen bottles of water at the police.
Protest. Well, that was see now, because part of the issue is that when you protest or you're rioting or some people have to go to jail. Yes. So you have to get the police
direct action.
Exactly. You have to get the police to react, right, so that you could get this image of the police reacting. And if the police is not moving fast enough, then you're going to have individuals in the crowd to spark that off.
Yeah. And I agree, but the problem I had was they were random white guys doing it, and I was
exactly.
Like,
now, and that's the issue. That's the issue, because you need that, but also that's a space where operatives, can also, or just individuals that's not really with your cause, could just cause some stuff to jump off. Now you might be you're much too young for this, but there was a movie called The Spook Who Sat by the Door. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've seen it, but in The Spook Who Sat by the Door, you had a man who, in the book, I think he went to the FBI, but in the movie he went to the CIA. He got trained. It was a black man. He was the only black man in the CIA. He got trained
Mhm.
and he served his time in the CIA. And when he came out, he went and he started training street gangs. Now, all that being said, he trained them to get them ready for what was coming, the revolution.
Yeah.
Now, but what sparked the whole revolution was that the police shot somebody who actually was guilty or a junkie. And the whole revolution started because of somebody that it shouldn't have really started over, in a sense. You
Mm-hmm.
understand what I'm saying? And
And
go
yeah,
ahead.
I was gonna say that comes back to that white peopling thing that I said earlier.
Right.
It's a white people thing to say that your life is not as important because you did XYZ wrong thing. And it's that whole he who cast the first stone idea. Like, whatever thing you did wrong doesn't necessarily validate the
Define
rule
you.
of your life.
Does it define you?
Does it define you, and does it define everything that you've done before? Like,
but that's the culture. In a sense, we live in a West Asian culture that is based on that.
yes.
You know what I'm saying? So you know, I'm wrong for saying, you know, the crackhead wasn't worth you dying for. But hey, I apologize. But you got my point.
No, I got your point. And what's so interesting about your point is just the fact of, like, when we talk about these reasons and these validations for these things, it comes down to that identification thing. But it also runs us back to who was at these protests and how unknowledgeable they really were.
Right.
Because anything was worthy of protesting last year, not saying anything else wasn't worthy. But what went across this nation, I thought, as a really quiet thing, was the 50-year anniversary of the murder of Fred Hampton and the Black Panther Party. It's been 50 years since that happened. Since they did a no-knock warrant and raided the house and killed everybody in that house except a few people. Right? And they only did it because this party, this group that was, you know, such a terror to the nation, who provided free meals, provided education classes, and all these things that now the government does publicly. But no one talks about that. That's something, to me, that should have been protested about and should have been biggerly understood and recognized. In academia, a professor that I had by the name of Judson Jeffries, he runs Spectrum, which is an academic journal, and they pushed out a whole collection of documentation on this specific anniversary.
How can I get it?
I'll find out.
All right, but hold on. I got your uncle on here. He looked like he's pulling at the bit. I'm gonna pull him up. It might be kind of loud, so go ahead. Hold on. Here he comes.
Okay. No, I wasn't chomping at the bit, but nonetheless, thank you, Jillian. I think you were very thorough. And now, Brother Hatem was referring earlier to why wouldn't you know that we know about Sankofa, given that it practically runs through everything we do.
Yeah, got you.
But, you know, remember, at the family reunions, I don't want to take up all the time. So I pick and choose what little to share, just to wet the bit, so to speak.
But you sprinkle it in like seeds. I know what you do. You sprinkle it in like seeds, which is why it's on one of our family reunion shirts. I understand.
Absolutely. So, you know, I'll just let Hatem ask the questions, because I tend to, let's just say, I am so extraordinarily proud of you.
He about to cry.
No, it ain't about all that.
No, I'm gonna take you off. I'm gonna take you out so you can cry. Either ask a question or go cry, man. Come on now.
No, I just
ain't no shame.
No, I just wanted to say that you all can't necessarily understand how proud of Jillian I am, because if you didn't hear, not only is she brilliant, but her son wanted to jump in as well and give his give his bit on the matter. and she had to tell him to wait his turn, but nonetheless,
Where you at?
Yeah. He is in his room. I'm gonna let him be. He does not have clothes on. He did it. But what's interesting is when I was taking him down to those protests, he saw stuff, and he's 3 years old, so he's still asking me questions and trying to raise a young black man in this space. It's like I don't even know what answers to give you. Because do I want you to not like the police? Do I want you to be aggressive to the police? I don't know what's the best idea for you right now. I don't even know. But
no, but those are questions, Jillian, that as some of the older people, one of the reasons why we have some of you younger people come on to talk is so that we can start formulating answers,
right,
and start putting together things to help answer those kinds of questions,
or to get y'all to practice Sankofa.
Always, I do it. I watched a movie that is actually outlawed in the U.S. Right?
Which movie is that?
Sankofa.
Oh, hey, now
The
the maker of that film lives in the United States of America.
Yes.
We met him. He real good people. He real good people.
Yeah.
But anyway, because he was going now the next movie after Sankofa he was going to do on the Maroons, but he wasn't able to raise the funding for that.
Oh, nice. Didn't know that.
Yeah. Now I got another question, and I'm gonna let you go.
Yeah.
Oh, but now you're going to be running in circles soon, where you're going to start running into people like that, and you just got to remember names, so that you will be able to, when you know what I'm saying. You're a scholar now. You a scholar. You on a scholar path, so you need to be able to remember names. So when you hear their name, you got to identify. So when you hear that director's name and that producer's name of that movie, when you meet them, because you're gonna meet them, you're gonna be able to get some information. Now, this is my last question.
Yeah.
What do you think about? Because education is your thing, right?
Yeah.
That's what do you think about grouping students by age rather than their skill level?
Grouping by age is helpful when it comes to behavioral development. But that's not to say that the same age is always the best together, because we might have a really advanced and behaviorally advanced 3-year-old who shouldn't necessarily be around other 3-year-olds who are still falling on the floor and peeing on themselves. You want to put people in the spaces that you elevate in. This is when you talk about friend circles. I've always been told you should be the lowest achieving person in your friend circles, which you continually elevate. So with kids, it's the same way. They're going to rise to whoever's the highest performing in that space. So
or the most controlling in that space.
Yes, the most dominating, sometimes the loudest, whatever that might look like, right? And so I don't like grouping kids in general. I don't like the actual infrastructure of public education that goes on grades, because it puts you in a box. And kids shouldn't learn in boxes because that stifles their creativity. Now, the good thing about teaching at an age band is that some things should align. So a 5-year-old might still like a lot of 5-year-old things that a 7-year-old wouldn't like, even if they're on the same academic level. Which makes it hard. Like, my son is pretty smart. He's 3 years old and he knows a lot of stuff. I can't put him in a regular kindergarten class, but he still needs to be in a kindergarten class, if that makes sense.
All right, so check this out, because the reason I'm asking the question is, academics is not the only thing that happens in school. We know that in school, socializing happens.
Yes.
So when it comes to social groups, a child could be with people his age. But if a kindergarten comes in doing 3rd grade math, when math time comes, I don't think that the kindergarten need to be with other kindergartners. They need to be where their math skill is. But when it comes to playing, and it comes to recess, and it comes to having fun time, they could be with people their age.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're talking about skill-based things, math is a skill-based thing, reading is a skill-based thing, social studies can be a skill-based thing. You could break school down into skill-based things, but still have the social space.
Yeah.
where individuals could be themselves or be their
So
age.
yeah.
I'm
So
just saying.
so one day I do want to be on somebody's school board, which hopefully you will see my plans come to fruition.
Wait, stop. Now hold on. Now you in Columbus?
I am in Columbus.
Me and your uncle was in the tribe where we're gonna be taking over the city by 2023, and we need somebody to run for the school board. So I'm just
I don't know if I'll be in
saying.
my position by 2024. I'm going back to get my doctorate by 2023.
There is people with third grade educations that are on the school board. I mean, if you look at some of the policies that come from a school board, you don't need no doctorate to be on the school board.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I will be your person. That's why
I'm just saying. I mean,
you're right.
And on top of that, that's a volunteer position where you can still pursue your degree and still be in that position. Because what we need is caring people and connected people that's running the politics of the cities that we are in. That's what we need. We don't need the top educated people, because usually, excuse my language, those people are assholes. We don't, because you can't connect with them.
They put on what we call a mask, and they never
exactly. Because you talked about it earlier when you said when you was talking about black and ethnicity, like you said Clarence Thomas. I think it was a Clarence Thomas. Oh no,
I said Ben Carson.
Ben Carson. You understand what I'm saying? Black as hell, but however,
not black supporting. That's the term.
Exactly. You know what I'm saying?
Not
West Asian. Culturally, let's say culturally, and culturally, he identifies as a West Asian.
Yeah.
So,
so one thing that I think solves some of the issues you mentioned, which is why I personally am not the fan of the education model we use, is we use this model where you have to have winners and you have to have losers. You have to have someone get an A and someone has to get a C or below to demonstrate that the class is hard enough, or it's challenging enough, or rigorous enough, or whatever weird term they want to use in education to describe a challenging environment. When we teach education in silos by saying we have math class, reading class, social studies, science, and some extracurricular, when we teach those separate, you will never have the creativity we need to solve our world problems. So a lot of my background is in engineering, and because of that, engineering is typically talked about as something that mixes science and math to solve some problems. However, you can solve all the problems you want with math science, but you might not solve the problems if you don't have the social studies and the reading background to understand the context of the issue you're solving.
That's right.
Or you might not actually be able to physically read the stuff you need for science if you don't have the reading skills, right? So when we stop teaching kids in silos and we go along this thing called exploration learning, what some people call as mastery learning, where we teach these things in an interdisciplinary way, we teach them together. We start to teach kids real world problems, and they solve real world problems. And then they actually start getting skills that they can apply to the real world, not just learning how to solve Pythagorean theorem or find the derivative of some random equation, right? They can actually take the thinking that they use to derive that answer and apply it to an issue or a worldly thing and solve something. But when we teach it separate, that's what happens. And what you're talking about, trying to get away from those grade bands, it would be benefited by teaching in an interdisciplinary way rather than the silos that we teach in. Because then you have all your kids learning and engaging at their appropriate level, even if it is a kindergarten room. If you put a task in front of a kindergartner, say it's 4 of them, you put a task in front of them, the kid who maybe doesn't understand all the intricacies of problem solving, they'll contribute more creativity than the kid who knows the problem solving technique. Because that problem solving technique is squared. The kid who maybe isn't as intellectually developed at that point, they'll think a little more because they have to. That's the only way they know how. And so it elevates everybody, at the same time, and starts to make it easier to have those grade bands. And now, when we talk about kids, it's important to talk about their, handy abilities or their different learning abilities. A student who has, truly actually has ADHD, they may be so much as like 2 grades behind or 2 age developments behind emotionally, socially, and academically. So putting a 6-year-old with ADHD in a first grade room might not make sense. They might need to stay with the kindergartners because their brain functions like a kindergartner. So that's where the age bands also get kind of mixed up and aren't appropriately done in our education system.
All right, I won't ask them more questions because you was only supposed to do a half an hour. You know, you did an hour and 14 minutes.
Yeah.
You the bomb, girl. You the bomb.
Thank you. And now I'm not surprised. I do events all the time for
Hey,
my
that's dope.
parents,
Hey, you was dope. He said, see, because you know when people be like, my niece is about to do something, I'm like, okay, she about to sing or play the violin, and it ain't gonna be good. You got on here and you started off with what was going on downtown, and you built up. I was like, oh,
yeah.
what? You know what I'm saying? Because the issue was today was that because I'm in a sense the technical person for Tawi, far as this internet thing, we got an elder that's doing something down at Kwanzaa Park today, and I wanted to be filming that, but Kwame set this piece up, and this was the piece that we was working on. Like, oh man, I gotta go and I gotta go and listen to his niece. Man, she probably 12 years old. She gonna take 15 minutes, and I'm like, man. But you were so impressive, and you made your uncle proud, and it was a pleasure having you on Giami Journey, and I hope that you will come back because I'm definitely gonna talk with him about having you come back. If you ever want to do an ebook, or you want to do an e-course, or you even want to do a show, or you just want to come on and have a conversation on Giami Journey Media, you're always welcome.
Oh, thank you. I will take you up on half these offers. I will.
All right, listen, I'm not playing. I'm trying to get your uncle to do an e-course, but he
I'm
tried
not
to
either.
He tried to
I'm feeling full. I didn't become so polished in the way that I am by not taking advantage of the opportunities.
All right, now this is what I'm gonna do. Do you have any final words for the family out here?
No, I think I've said a lot. I think I've said everything I can. If I were to say anything, the biggest word to wise of everything right now is like assuming positive intent. Because though we look at a lot of these spaces and we recognize racism and system is present all the time, right? I think what I've learned in trying to educate people, and there's always an opportunity for education. Even when someone says the most racist and biggest thing, there's an opportunity for education, at least for me. That's what I see. And so I'm learning to assume positive intent, and that more so applies to our learning spaces in our schools. And I only say that to say allies that we have that want to do the right thing, they're trying to find out how to do the right thing, though that's not our responsibility. It pushes the movement forward if they know better. So assuming positive intent and teaching kids to write scholarship letters. Keep telling kids to apply for scholarships. I won't brag. I have a scholarship that pays up through my doctorate. I have yet to pay for school. And they pay for my living costs.
Welcome to the club. And isn't that a beautiful feeling? That was, well, I ain't make it as far as a doctor, but hey, I made it all the way through my bachelor's for free. That shit feels good. But
it does. It does. Man. And kids they don't realize it. And for mine, I'm a Gates scholar. So I had to write 8 essays, middle of senior year when I'm having fun. I wrote them 8 essays and they paid for my school like up to 10 years. So the opportunity becomes so immense when you have that. And, a lot of people just don't know to do that, but also don't know to network and have the people to support you for that. So,
you see the comment from Elder Margarita?
I need to come back. I have no problem coming back.
Hold on. So I'm gonna bring your uncle up and see if he has some final words. Because the background, I'm gonna talk. I got to figure out what's going. We gonna get him a real mic. That's what
Okay.
I'm gonna invest in get him a real mic. But go ahead,
Okay.
Kwame. You got some last words?
First of all, you hear background noise?
Man, it's like we are in a tunnel or something. I don't know what it is, but when I turn you off, is it? I, it's like a, I don't know. It's like a furnace running or something in the background.
No, yeah, it was my fan. That's
Is
what I
that what that
think.
is?
That's what I think it was. I mean, do you
I
still
think
hear it?
so.
No, listen. I'm gonna get you a mic, dog. I'm thinking. I'm scheming on it. I'm thinking of a master plan.
All right.
Ain't
All
nothing
right.
Just
but
say
sweat
that.
inside my hands. You about to get a mic.
All right. So part of I used to teach tutor upward bound at Columbus State, and I taught children out of North, and we were just talking I was just talking with some of the children, right? And I think at that time, Jillian, oh shoot, I can't think of her name now. She used to play basketball. Oh gosh, going
To my
back.
Tyra?
No. I'm talking about at she was at North the same time you were.
At
She
Northland? Are you talking about Alexis Peterson?
no the not Alexis.
Simone? Denham?
Yes.
That might be one. Tatiana was one.
No, her brother also Witherspoon. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Jasmine. Yes,
Yeah.
Jasmine.
So now Jasmine, I tutored her in actually, I used to tutor at her school when she attended Main Street. She was in first grade, and as part of my rest time, in a manner of speaking, I'd go to that first grade class, and she, along with other of the students there, would read to me. Okay, so I I'm trying to tie all this in real quick. So anyway, so
We control the airways, brother.
right,
Do your thing.
we were talking about basketball at first. I'm talking about basketball with some of my North students, and so we started talking about into other areas, and then I said, "Oh yeah, and I have a niece that attends North as well," and they were like, "Who?" I was like, "Her name's Jillian Deas." She's like, "Oh yeah, she's really smart."
Yeah. And no, when I was at Northland, I spent time building robots. So
That's part of that engineering. But yeah, it's just to say, just Jillian has been one to take advantage of the opportunities afforded her, and for that, I am so very proud of her. Really proud of all that she's doing and continues to do. And Jillian, you've just done your family really proud this night.
Very
certainly
happy.
did.
Thank you.
So, family, without any further ado, I want to thank y'all for tuning in. This has been an incredible night. Let me see if I got any more commercials. Oh yeah, of course I'm gonna run my last commercial. This is telling y'all basically I should have put this up, but I'm gonna redo this commercial. But y'all need to tribe up, even. But then Julian just kind of messed that up with the whole ethnicity and that. I can't stand. Sometimes I can't stand you, smart people. But all right. Well, here we go. What is a lion without his pride? What is a whale without his pod? What is a monkey without his troop? What is a wolf without his pack? The answer is very simple. They are the same thing that a human being is without a tribe. Pray. And the Wi-Fi is acting whack on me now, man. But family, I want to thank Miss Jillian for being on. She just popped up, then she popped back off.
I'm here.
We're gonna have her back, and we had a real good time. Her uncle was here, as her guardian angel, and we want to thank him for setting us up. So with that, we are going to say peace, family.